Today I will talk about how women managed to use toilets with their extravagant dresses. Were they forced to pee themselves, or was there a knack to it? Please continue to support my channel by subscribing. The bathroom that we are privileged to use today was invented during the Victorian era. However, they had not quite mastered all of the logistics of making it a smooth operation. The water was sometimes too hot, which led to many people being scalded. The toilet was also known to randomly explode, and this was due to the flammable gases that were emitted from human waste, such as methane and hydrogen sulphide. Over a number of years, the build-up of human excrement in the sewers meant that the backlog would come back up into the toilets inside people's homes. A naked flame or candle would and did set alight, and candles were still being used for light at the time, and the two were not very compatible. So how did women go to the toilet and those huge puffy dresses? Women's clothing was extremely troublesome, but looks and class were prioritised much more than convenience. The dresses were made up of layers of ruffled lace, intricate embellishments, satin and velvet. They were extremely heavy for the women, which made everyday tasks near impossible. Not only were they heavy, they were also floor length, which, using your imagination, you can see how this would cause quite the challenge for women. Underneath their dresses were heavy underskirts and petticoats, as well as restrictive corsets. These challenging undergarments had to be removed in order to use the varying different types of public restrooms. Chamber pots could be used by women, which were modest porcelain or metal containers that women could use at home. These pots were put away in a cupboard or under the bed and brought out when needed. They were convenient because they could be transported when required, rather than being static in the outside building. These were used especially by those that lived in homes with more than one story, and of whom it would be inconvenient to go downstairs and then use. Each person may have had their own chamber pot, but once full these would be poured into a larger pot or pit that a number of people had access to. These women would have to retreat to private rooms or their bedroom or dressing room to relieve themselves in private. This would be a huge task and would require removing many layers just for them to get redressed again afterwards. One solution to this issue: these pots were typically covered with a lid to cover any odours and were frequently kept in a special cabinet or under the bed. Chamber pots, as you can imagine, were very unhygienic and smelly, and so women had to get creative for when they travelled away from their private homes to further afield. In a bid to prevent their dresses from becoming ruined, which was costly, they would often use a urinal bottle. These bottles were made of glass or metal and had a spout at one end, which would allow the women to be inserted into the dress and allow women to urinate while still wearing their clothing. The beauty of these devices was that women had so cleverly created meant they would be carried privately in the women's handbags or pockets. A toilet chair was another option that was used. It was a portable chair with a hole in the seat that allowed women to use the restroom. Women could lift up their dresses to use, or would often require another person, such as a maid, to help them. The most popular remedy, however, was for women to simply take off their underskirt and petticoat to use the restroom. For privileged women, separate rooms and closets were used. They were often found on the ground floor in a different wing of the house. Inside these rooms were often a toilet, a wash basin, and a vanity or dressing table. When these Victorian women did not have access to their private rooms, they were forced to use public restrooms that lacked adequate lighting, as well as being very small to use and highly unhygienic. Of course, these women preferred their own private rooms, but they were not always available to use. The women of this period were exceptionally judged, and held to the highest of standards for modesty and decorum. This seemed an impossible task with such difficult and inconvenient facilities. Special knacks and tricks were passed down from women on how to be discreet and cautious. The task was further complicated by their monthly menstrual cycles, which was also highly taboo at the time. These women were expected to hide their cycles as well as concealing any symptoms. Society had taught them that their period was dirty and a source of embarrassment, and therefore they would often hide away during such time that their period would start. Sanitary towels did not exist like they do today, and women were faced with using rags, clothes, or folded newspaper, or even moss, which would have been uncomfortable and unhygienic. There were not the best practices for washing such items, and so they would be reused over and over without proper sanitation, which increased the likelihood of these women getting infections. Other materials that were popular to use were sheepskin or leather vaginal pouches, but these were extremely costly and hard to wash. Many women suffered during their period, as they do now, with cramps, bloating and headaches, and there were very few options for pain relief. With the absence of proper pain medication, women would use hot water bottles, warm baths and herbal remedies. Opium was widely available at the time, but it had devastating consequences, and many women would become addicted to them, only exacerbating their emotional symptoms, which would lead to more shame. Society viewed women who were on their period as being emotionally unstable and weak, and so they were taught and forced to suppress their feelings and interaction with others. Scientists in the years that followed would begin to research into the menstrual cycle, which did go on to provide better information about it, so that improvements could be made to women's lives. Please continue to support my channel by subscribing. Please comment, like and subscribe if you wish for more stories, and leave your suggestions below and I will endeavour to cover them.